Hello and happy Friday, everybody. So glad you can make it to this fantastic live webinar today. For those watching the recording in the future, as usual, you can go ahead and pretend it's Friday for the next hour. As you can see, we've got another wonderful guest presenter today, Eustacia Brossart from CMG. I'll introduce her in just a moment, but first we've got our usual live viewer webinar orientation. Today's topic is on a tool set that's not actually part of LandFX, but is entirely its own app at climatepositivedesign.com that we thought was an important enough design analysis companion tool for landscape architects that we should bring them in to talk about it. That means most of you are going to be learning about this for the first time today. So you'll want to have your Q&A box open and handy to type in your questions for Eustacia. Click that Q&A button at the bottom right now to get it ready for the rest of the webinar. Type it in as soon as you have a question. You'll also want to know that at the top is a view options button to switch between windowed and full screen mode. And as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded. So back to today's topic, all about climate positive design, the Climate Positive Design Challenge and the Pathfinder web app. We were actually introduced to it at last year's ASLA, and I've tried it out myself and strongly feel that it's an amazing companion tool for landscape architectural design. The purpose is inspiring, and I feel it really helped me to wrap my head around a great method on how to approach being an effective advocate for ecologically responsible design as a landscape architect. So I really hope that for all of you LandFX users, this presentation today inspires you too, and that you take your planting and your reference note schedules out after this webinar and try it out with it. So I'm happy to introduce Eustacia, our presenter today. As a landscape architect at CMG, Eustacia has worked with Pamela Conrad and Atelier 10 to help develop the Landscape Carving Calculator Pathfinder tool and the Climate Positive Design Challenge. Eustacia has worked for over a decade on designed and built landscape projects at a variety of scales, from the National Mall in Washington, D.C., to tech, university, and museum campuses, to even public playground in San Francisco. So thank you so much for joining us today, Eustacia. Please take it away.
All right. Hello, everybody. As Amanda said, my name is Eustacia Brossart. I'm a landscape architect at CMG Landscape Architecture in San Francisco, California, and I'm here to talk to you about climate positive design going beyond neutral. So we've all been experiencing various effects of climate change lately, wherever we are. In San Francisco, we're fortunate to not actually be on fire, but it's been tough to breathe for the last couple months. This was the view from my window a few weeks ago, around 10 a.m. when the sun apparently forgot to rise. And here driving over the Sierras last month near Mono Lake. So it's been pretty brutal. And I've actually escaped to New York for a month, where I am now. And like many Californians, I'm starting to wonder whether I might have to become a climate migrant far sooner than I had imagined. Meanwhile, as the climate crisis becomes increasingly acute, and we've got, hurricanes and storms and drought everywhere, the federal level efforts to combat climate change are being slashed and hamstrung and reversed. But we've also seen during the quarantine the effect that human actions can have on the environment, as air and water and wildlife are rebounding a bit this year. So here, this photo is from Delhi, India, and we can see the air quality last November on the left versus at the end of March 2020 on the right. So we can see that we can have an impact on climate change now, and we don't need to wait for policy changes or permission from the government. So this is CMG Landscape Architecture. We're a mission-driven firm, And our mission is to increase social and ecological well-being through artful design. And we've done quite a lot of work related to climate change. So for example, this Treasure Island development and the San Francisco Port Waterfront Resiliency Project, which I'm working on, are large-scale projects through which we're helping the city adapt to sea level rise. And it's important for landscape architects to help cities adapt to the effects of climate change, but we at CMG, particularly Pamela Conrad, wondered whether we could help mitigate the causes of climate change as well. And we know that the urban built environment is a huge contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. So what we wondered is, can we change that story to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and sequester as much carbon as possible through the urban landscape? And now landscape architects are uniquely positioned within the building design fields to actually sequester carbon through the trees and plants that we install, which intake carbon dioxide and store it in their wood and in the soil. So Pamela Conrad had a simple question: how can we minimize the emissions and maximize the carbon sequestration of our projects? But we looked around and realized that there weren't really tools, resources, or guidance available to help landscape architects figure out what our carbon impact actually is. And so we started to develop our own tools. So we took a look at some of our projects and we were pretty surprised by what we found. So at this park project, for example, it would take 15 years for the installed trees and shrubs that you can see to offset the emissions of the materials, the construction, and the operations of the park. But we figured out that with some pretty minor design tweaks, we could dramatically change the carbon story. So how would we do this? First, you got to reduce the quantity, you got to reduce the amount of carbon emitted. So best way to do that is to reduce the quantity of paving, and then to switch to materials that have lower embodied carbon. So for example, switching from concrete to stabilized DG. Then we specify electric and organic maintenance practices so that there are not, to reduce the ongoing emissions of maintenance of the project over time, and reduce the quantity of turf grass. Turf is actually a carbon emitter due to the maintenance. So by doing all of those, we could cut the emissions of this park in half. And then by increasing the quantity of trees and shrubs, we can increase the carbon sequestered during the project's 50-year lifespan by 50%. And that would cut the time to carbon neutral to 5 years. So took a look at some more projects. Plazas are particularly difficult. This one, for example, would take almost 200 years to hit carbon neutral and then climate positive, because of course plazas have so much paving and tend to have very little planting. But we switched the concrete to concrete with cement substitutes, changed some of that concrete to stabilized DG, and then increase the quantity of shrubs and trees. We could cut that down to 20 years to carbon neutral. So that is slashing emissions by 2/3 and more than tripling sequestration. And we haven't really changed the design intent very much. It just looks greener, more pleasant. So based on all these projects that we looked at, we set the climate positive design challenge, which is that parks, gardens, campuses, hospitality, residential designs should reach climate positive, meaning sequestering more carbon than they emit, within 5 years of construction. And plazas and streetscapes should reach climate positive within 20 years of construction. And what you can see here on the left is our current business as usual for landscape projects based on the data that we have, which is that we are emitting more carbon than we sequester. But if we switched to climate positive design, we could, in the next 30 years, be carbon neutral. And by 2050, we could, as a global profession, remove a gigaton of carbon dioxide beyond our emissions from the atmosphere. So a lot of folks have worked on this from many organizations, and all of these organizations are contributing to, advising on, and taking on this challenge to help us start a global movement. And so a year ago, we launched the Climate Positive Design Challenge with this free website and tool. And let's take a spin through it. So, climatepositivedesign.com, pretty simple to remember. So let's take a look at the resources first. All right, so first we can take a look at these case studies. Make sure that you are. Okay. So this is the one I showed you before, but we've got these cool sliders on here so you can see the before and after. Here's a garden project, before and after, cutting from 22 years to 5. There's that plaza. A tech campus project, also from 22 years to 5 years. Converting from concrete and steel to wood is one big way to make a difference in the carbon impact. There's another park where we increase the quantities of trees and shrubs. And another campus. And we generally feel that the new version is a better design in any case, and we're keeping the design intent intact. So those are the case studies. We've also got in here a design toolkit. And this shows various elements and suggestions for materials that have lower embodied carbon, and as well as planting strategies, afforestation, constructing wetlands, planting tiny forests within cities, using native and adaptive planting, etc. Habitat restoration and protection, and approaches to soils, including reducing grading and soil import using biochar and compost and organic fertilizers rather than carbon intensive fertilizers. So this whole thing can be downloaded for your use, the design toolkit. We've also got under the resources tab, the data report that has all the information about the metrics and data that went into the tool, and additional resources from other organizations. So let's take a look at the challenge itself. So as I said, what we're shooting for, and our first goal is that by the year 2030, all the landscape architecture projects should be climate positive, meaning sequestering more carbon than we have emitted. And we launched this a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. And so far we've had a number of contributors, over 1,000 contributors, almost 700 companies, over 100 countries, and almost over 500,000 trees planned for planting, which is pretty impressive. You can see here on this map all of the areas where projects have been logged. And currently, anybody that adds a project is listed here as a challenge contributor. You can see many different firms, and we would be thrilled if your firm would join us and be listed here as a contributor. So let's take challenge. So we've just launched a beta version a month or two ago of the Pathfinder tool, and that's what we're going to be looking at here. So when you first start, you get this kind of demo. So as we know, if the more carbon that you emit, the longer it's going to take to reach carbon neutral and climate positive. The more carbon you sequester through your planting, the sooner you'll reach neutral. So ideally, you want to emit as little carbon as possible and sequester as much carbon as possible. So now I'm going to say, we're going to head into San Francisco. So you can type in any location here. Brings you to this map. And then down in the left corner here, you can draw your project boundary. So this is a plaza that's in front of the Ferry Building at the end of Market Street in San Francisco. So I'm going to draw the project boundary. It's about an acre, all right.
And it looks like it's just catching up with you after the zooming.
Oh, okay.
With the display. There we go.
All right.
It's caught up now.
Okay, and can you see the
Yes, I can see the boundary just around that plaza.
Okay, great. So I've just drawn this boundary. And it's told me how big it is. And so now we'll enter the title of this. This is our LandFX demo. And we're going to turn this plaza into a park. You can then enter your estimated completion date. So let's say we're going to finish this in a year. We'll use imperial units and say we're in concept design. I'm going to check here that this is an academic study or project not expected to be built. When you're playing around with the tool, if you could please check that so that we can keep track of projects that are actually being built versus those that we're just checking out the system. So this is a design alternative. LandFX1. Okay, and as I said, this is a new version. It's a little bit in beta, so sometimes these photos that show up top are not exactly from the location, but you can add your own photo here to show the actual site. Okay, so here we have three options: materials, plants, and operations. So first it takes us to materials. So now we can select our materials. So I'm going to start with paving. Skip that guide. So let's say paving, we're going to have, let's say, pedestrian concrete, and we can switch dimensions here. So I'm going to just plug in an area. I'm going to say about 20% of the area, so about 10,000 square feet. And it's pedestrian, so we're going to put that at 4 inches thick. Now you can check out the element details here, and it tells you that sub-base materials are not included. Hopefully in future versions they will be, but at the moment they're not included. So I'm then going to say, all right, well, let's put those in. So I'm going to put in, again, I'm going to switch to area rather than length by width and say we're going to have 10,000 square feet of ag base and maybe 6 inches deep. So you can see these numbers here indicate how much carbon is emitted by that material, or carbon equivalent in the production of that material. And what we've found is that the vast majority of carbon emissions for landscape architecture projects are in the materials themselves. So that's the embodied carbon that's been released in the production of the concrete, for example. All right, so it's good for paving. Let's do concrete site wall. Let's say maybe a 50-foot long seat wall. It's maybe 2 feet wide. And to get down to the footing, probably about, oops, that's in inches, so about 3 feet tall. And now you can see, oh, that note disappeared, but I'm going to click here. And once again, it gives us information about when the impact happens. This is once during construction. And we're not expecting it to be replaced over the lifespan of it. So this doesn't include the footing. So I'm going to add a footing, which is also going to be 50 feet long, probably 4 feet wide, and maybe 12 inches thick. So now here there's a pop-up down here that says we need to add the steel reinforcement. So let's see. So for 1,000 square feet, that's going to add the reinforcement. Okay, so you can see in all these red numbers here what the how much carbon has been emitted so far. We also have fences and gates, various site elements. We can add, let's add some drainage. So how about some area drains? Maybe we have 20 cast iron area drains and maybe about 200 feet of PVC pipe. Call that 3-inch pipe. You can also add other subsurface elements like drain rock, HDPE liners, etc. And then at the bottom here, you can create a custom material for something as long as you know what the kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per unit are. And you can get this from an environmental product declaration. So for any product that you're working with, you can ask the manufacturer for an EPD, environmental product declaration, which would include this information, or you can calculate it yourself. So we'll call that good for now for our materials. Now let's check out the plants. So start with trees. And how about some large deciduous trees? So first thing you need to do is select what region you're in. And this is in San Francisco, which is considered globally to be in the southern growth zone. And now let's say we're gonna put a bunch of trees in here. So let's say we'll have 50 large deciduous trees. Now down in the corner here, you can see it now tells you it's gonna take 16 years for those 50 trees to offset the carbon emitted by the materials we already entered. So 16 years, it's not terrible, but not great. So let's add some more. We'll go with how about some medium evergreen trees, maybe do another 50. Okay, it's dropped us to 14 years to positive. Maybe we can do some small deciduous understory trees as well. Do another 50. Make this a tiny little forest there. All right, now we're down to 13 years to positive. So now I'm gonna plug in some lawn. Let's start out with intensive management lawn. So let's say we want to have 5,000 square feet of lawn. You can see here that this is actually a net emitter of carbon dioxide due to the maintenance for lawn. However, if we did a no-mow lawn instead, same size, 5,000 square feet, you can see that it will actually sequester more carbon than emitted based on the maintenance practices. So I'm gonna get rid of that lawn, keep it a no-mow lawn or meadow. And now let's add some shrubs. So let's see, got 10,000 square feet of planting, 5,000 square feet of no-mow, so let's say about 35,000 square feet of shrubs. We're just gonna fill it up. Oh, no, 25,000. Okay, and here you can select how much, what's the percentage of deciduous versus evergreen for those shrubs, and then what's the spacing, what's the size and spacing on those. We'll go with about 50-50, and this is going to automatically plug in a quantity of shrubs for you. Now, this is a little bug in this version here. It often won't update with years to positive after you add the shrubs for some reason that I don't know. But once you enter something in another cell, it will update. So now we can see we're down to 7 years to positive, so that's pretty good. So let's look at operations now. And I'm going to start out with demo. So we know we had a lot of paving there, and that we had to remove. So about 40,000 square feet of paving, and let's say it was, a foot thick. Now you can see that it's quite a lot of carbon dioxide that's emitted in the process of doing that demolition. So we're back to 10 years to positive. Other operations include the equipment that's used. You can specify what type of equipment is going to be used and roughly how many hours per year, what kind of fertilizer is used, and what you're doing with any trees that might be cut down, how much grading you're doing, etc. So let's take a look down here at these design suggestions. This is going to tell us, okay, our biggest culprit here is that concrete pedestrian paving. We can scroll through all these. All right. So let's go back to our materials and see if we can pick something a little bit better. So I'm going to say, I'm going to go back to paving and say, let's do DG, stabilized crushed stone, instead of concrete. So we'll do the same quantity, 10,000 square feet. And it's probably about 3 inches thick. So you can see here that the carbon emissions for DG are about 1/10 of that for concrete. So we're going to get rid of that concrete, turn it into DG, and now we're down to 4 years to positive. So actually, if we wanted, you could probably keep some concrete in some areas, and but just reduce it to the areas where it's absolutely necessary, and where possible use other types of aggregate, stabilized crushed stone, wood decking, etc. So now we're down to 4 years to positive. That is pretty good. So let's take a look here. We can view the scorecard. So this graph is similar to that one we looked at the beginning. It shows us how much carbon was sequestered initially, emitted initially. And within what we're considering to be the 50-year lifespan of the project, which is based on the Architecture 2030 challenge, how much carbon we will sequester, which is about 720 metric tons. And that's pretty great. You can see in this graph what the major sources of project emissions, carbon emissions are. So in our case, the demolition was actually the single largest emitter of carbon, since we reduced the paving emissions, then the paving, and then the walls, drainage, etc. What we've found, just generally speaking, as much as possible, you want to try to avoid concrete and steel, as well as aluminum. And then on the second page, it's got the specific quantities for each item that you entered. And you can download this as a PDF and you can show it to your client. And then we can go back, and you can always then come back, because you have to log in initially when you come to the website. So you're able to log in, check out your projects, add more detail, or add new versions in which maybe you have a different quantity of different types of paving or planting, to see how you can change these elements to have a different carbon impact. Always one of these projects will be designated as the primary design, and that one will be counted within the Climate Positive Design Challenge. So back to the main website. Let's see here. We have a connect page here, which we would appreciate it if you would connect with us. Let us know if you have any questions or suggestions. Here's that contact information. And let's take a look at, back to, oops, one. Attention here. So here was that plaza that we were just looking at. That's how it looks today. It is a Lawrence Halpern project, so. And this is how we're imagining it might look in the future. And we've started to think about what could be the global impact of our work as landscape architects. So the American Forests Council recommends 40% tree canopy in cities. In the US, the current average is about 27%. So we could do quite a bit by just increasing our urban tree canopy to that 40%. Globally, that would be about 150 million trees, which would be quite a lot of carbon sequestered, 2.4 gigatons in the next 50 years, potentially. And if we were to increase that canopy by 20 additional trees per acre, we could have an even bigger impact. So this would require thinking and building more creatively. Could be creating microforests in cities, turning abandoned and derelict areas into ecosystems, etc. And this is a kind of new study that we're in early stages of, and warrants future analysis, but we want to pose this as we're thinking about what we can do as landscape architects. So what's next? For the Pathfinder app, we're hoping to add more material types. We'd like to get products in here. So furnishings and other manufactured elements. And on the sequestration side, we're looking to add more data about natural and restoration planting types like forests and wetlands, grasslands, as well as hopefully species specific information. And we'd also like to, and are, pairing up with architects, engineers, and others to go beyond our landscape architecture silo and scale this up. What we'd like ideally is for clients to be embracing climate positive design for their project at the beginning, so that all of the disciplines can be thinking about this as we design our projects. So what you can do as designers, please go in and log your projects, spread the word to other designers, and as I said, to other disciplines. You can add to the suggestion box on climatepositivedesign.com and ask manufacturers for environmental product declarations to add more data to our database. Educators can use the app, report, the toolkit, and the case studies as teaching tools. Of course, we're operating kind of on our own time at this point, so we appreciate donations, or if anybody is interested in doing further research or partnering with us, please let us know. And we're also hoping that product manufacturers who are working to reduce their carbon footprint can partner with us to be sponsors and to provide environmental product declarations. So we need to move our cities from this to this. And let's remember that cities full of trees and plants not only sequester more carbon, but also contribute to greater health and well-being for their residents and all species. So as landscape architects, let's join together as leaders to create a climate positive future. And with that, I would love to hear your questions and comments.
Great. Yeah, we have some questions starting to file in. Again, if all of our attendees, if you have a question, there's that Q&A box down at the bottom you can click on and type it in now. We have lots of time for questions. I did want to thank you, Eustacia, for going through what the Climate Positive Design Challenge is, how to use the Pathfinder app, and to try and achieve it in our designs. I really like I wanted to kind of say before we get into questions, I really like the way you guys frame this, how the initial act of constructing our designs will always emit carbon at the beginning. And it's such a great goal to at least just make sure we're offsetting our own impact within at least those 5 years. Obviously that's small, it seems like a really achievable goal to me. And I really like thinking about how far we can take it as landscape architects. I like thinking of it almost like a game, like how low can you go? Well, the client goals, right?
Yes.
We did have a question from a attendee who popped up. She said it would seem that a large carbon impact of a project is the literal parking lot, people driving their cars to the site. And they were wondering, could you add bike racks and zero emission parking spots, even a bus stop? What would be some things to consider for that kind of design?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, since transportation is a huge contributor to greenhouse gases. So one of the things that we've embraced as a practice and should be included in designs is trying to increase walkability and bicycle infrastructure. How to actually measure that is a little bit beyond our capabilities at the moment, but that is certainly one of the elements that we're encouraging. And as we think about what this impact could be at a city scale, and then more broadly, how these things knit together, how we are encouraging bicycling and walking rather than driving, that's where the impacts really start to get large. And you're right that those parking lots themselves are also quite a contributor, whether they're asphalt or concrete. So reducing the lot and reducing the need to drive are big ticket items, yes.
Great, and then I got a question for when adding those trees at the add trees stage, if you're kind of in the middle of the US or between those growth zones, how would we figure out which growth zone our trees should be in?
Well, everybody's in some growth zone. So let's go and take a look at that map. I'm going to go back to the project, and let's say we're going to add detail and go to that map. So, I mean, as you can see, yes, it kind of fluctuates through the Midwest here. So, you know, Kansas and some areas are kind of straddling. So you, yeah, just got to pick whichever one that actual site falls within. And, you know, yes, of course, anything that's right on a border is probably a little bit of each, but yeah, choose it based on where the project falls within this map.
Okay, and one of the big questions I had that we talked about before a little bit was, I know that a big thing about this is, of course, meeting the client goals on a design project. What are your suggestions on how to kind of convince the client or bring this to the client to spend the money to, say, plant more trees instead of lawn or instead of hardscape or more shrubs, especially in the current economic climate going on today? How would you frame that for all of our users kind of wanting to implement this in their next project?
Yeah, this is, of course, a big challenge, right? Is when we're trying to change the status quo, of course, there's resistance. So what we've found is that, you know, prior to having these tools, we would try to talk to clients about carbon sequestration, but we couldn't get a lot of traction. But being able to actually measure what the sequestration will be for a project really changes people's minds. So we've had a lot of clients become quite excited about the possibility of being a net climate positive project, and be able to then tout that as a benefit of their project. And so we've actually found that in some cases, we've been more competitive in terms of getting projects, because people are obviously waking up to the climate crisis and wanting to do something. I think that, you know, we're all getting really tired of the endless bad news and want to take some action. And this is a way that we actually can take some action in the projects that we're physically building. Small as it might be, each individual project, I think people, including clients, get excited about being able to measure and show what they are doing. So now, of course, what comes with that is a different maintenance regime. You know, you can't just hose off a giant plaza and, you know, use a trimmer on one hedge and call it a day. You know, this requires moving to more nuanced maintenance, more native and adaptive plants that don't use as much water, especially if we're going to be planting a lot of trees in the West, for example. And so, you know, that's not always an easy sell, but it's what we need to do as a society. And it's been very helpful to us to be able to actually measure the impacts of that and show that to clients and get them excited about it, rather than seeing it as another burden.
Yeah, I like that. We gotta kind of put on our advocate hat and exercise those chops to be able to kind of get them excited about it and into it as well. We also had a comment from one of our viewers, so maybe you can comment on it. They said the guy who was instrumental in developing stormwater mitigation in Portland, Oregon, started planting lots of trees in parking lots, those without sticky debris. I guess the trees without sticky debris. He said the data shows that this mitigates outgassing of cars and surfaces significantly. I don't know if you've heard about that.
I have not. I'd love to know what, I'd love to see that actual data. So if you wouldn't mind, on the website, as I said, there's a comment section. We'd love to hear that. we're trying to accumulate as much data as we can and don't want to be reinventing any wheels.
No, perfect. Okay, great. So that viewer can go over there and maybe fill in that information for them. That might be part of a future update on this. And I think we were talking before about, did you have any suggestions on how to decrease the carbon that happens during the demolition of a site?
Well, I suppose if you were using, you know, equipment that is less carbon intensive, that would be one way. I don't know how many electric bulldozers are available these days. So in our current paradigm, I think what's most effective is to actually reuse the on-site material. So if you're able to take all that asphalt, grind it up and reuse it, or grind up the concrete and use it as the ag base, for example. We have a number of projects where we are where we have to cut down trees in order to build a, you know, the main building. And so what we're doing is working with local mills to then mill that timber and turn it into site elements, furnishings, amphitheaters, etc. So as to whatever degree you can reuse what's on site and creatively rethink demolition into a resource, that will improve the carbon story.
Awesome, thank you. I had a question from Rachel. She asked, for sites that start as forest, does this tool take deforestation and soil site disturbance into consideration?
We are working on that. So in this, well, let's go to operations. So we've added in this new version an existing trees impact. I think this, it needs a bit of work on our end. But what you can see here is you have a few different options. So if you have, let's say, a large deciduous tree, you can specify whether it would become a harvest wood product. So for example, if you're going to turn it into furnishings, in which case it's continuing to store that carbon. Or if it just becomes mulch, then it is going to, let's say 10 trees are turned into mulch. That's in that case, that carbon is going to be emitted relatively soon, as opposed to what happens when it's a harvest wood product. It will be maintained in that wood for quite a while. Or it can be turned into biochar, which locks the carbon into a kind of charcoal form that can be tilled into the soil as a soil amendment that increases fertility and nutrient uptake by the plants. And that also is a great way to maintain that carbon rather than releasing it to the atmosphere. So the way that this operates is the same as how architects and the mass timber industry are approaching existing trees, which is that mass timber buildings are considered to be sequesterers of carbon because they're retaining the carbon in that wood rather than letting it be released back to the atmosphere as those trees decompose. So for harvest wood products and biochar, it's actually considered to be a net sequesterer of carbon. As I said, I think this needs a little bit of work, and we've been talking about how we count whether you're cutting down those trees or not, and how we're not quite taking into account whether the trees, if they are kept where they are, how they continue to sequester over time. That's a little bit harder to calculate because of the age and type of tree, etc. So this is where we are now, and we're hoping to improve that. And if you have specific suggestions, I'd love to hear them.
Awesome. And so that would also probably apply to any hardscape elements in the eventual design as well. If they're made out of wood, those would actually sequester.
Yeah, it's the sort of tricky mind-bending thing. If we consider wood products to be used in that you are bringing in to use in the site to be carbon neutral. They're locking that carbon in. They're not emitting the carbon, but it's already been sequestered by those trees. But the trees that are on site, when you take over that site, you then have the choice of whether to release that carbon back to the atmosphere or lock it in. So that's why there's a slightly different approach there. So for materials, for wood, etc. So let's say wood decking. Let's say we have 1,000 square feet. So there's actually a little bit of carbon emitted in that wood decking, and I believe that's because we expect it to be replaced a couple of times over the lifespan of the project, and the emissions from hauling it in, etc., add up to a bit of emissions. So this is one of the things that we've added in this new version of the app, is that we're taking into account the kind of expected number of replacements of different materials over the 50-year lifespan of the project. So of course, asphalt's going to be replaced more than concrete, etc. So that's why. So you're starting with a kind of neutral product, but the hauling it in, etc., has some emissions associated with it.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like it's really well researched, and I mean, there's always more research to explore and build on it. We do have one more question from Sue. She says, I'm in Seattle and think the climate map maybe should be more nuanced to account for differences in natural rainfall and typical weather.
So this is, this map is, let's see. So this is based on USDA growth zones. Okay. It's not our own creation. Totally understand what you mean. The microclimates have an impact. What this is really about is how much sun exposure do you have in your part of the globe, and that impacts tree growth, right? Just kind of at a global level. So that's what this north, central, and south is about. And I mean, understood, Seattle is about as lush as could be, but it is considered by the USDA to be in the north growth zone.
Okay, perfect. I think that's all the questions that everybody had. I wanted to thank everybody for coming out today. And I wanted to thank you, Eustacia, for taking the time to walk us through all of this.
It's my pleasure. Thank you all for joining. And like I said, be happy if you connect with us on the website. Let us know any thoughts or questions, comments, and spread the word.
Great, and have a great weekend, everybody.